Hey! Believe it or not, this was actually the first word of my my bar mitzvah speech. The rabbi didn't take too well to it, but it's a good way of sort of reviving that social buzz. Wow. I'd like to get everyone to do a round of applause for the eloquence of art, intellect, and originality that we've seen today. Just applaud. Now, in particular, it's an interesting connection when we looked at that architecture speech about reintegrating aesthetics and art, imaginative art, into our everyday lives. Now, I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question to start this off, because I'm going to be talking about music. Music being something that is completely essential to our lives, so essential, it's essential as you're breathing. This is my argument. So if I told you that on a daily basis you had the opportunity to have an increased state of sensory awareness, of social bonding, of a connection to your own consciousness, to other people, a rich sense of imagination and wonder, wouldn't you take it? And the good news for us is that this is not the next wonder drug on the pharmaceutical market. It is actually something that artfully created music is meant to do. And the only reason that art music is meant to do this is because your brains are actually built. They are wired to be inspired by music. So, that's this. Oh, wait. There we go. Your brains wanted that, right? Here is the malaise, though, this social malaise. All around you, in cafes, on the news, on TV, on the radio, much of the popular music that you hear has tuned your ears to only basic levels of comfort, of entertainment. They only satisfy bottom levels of a hierarchy of basic musical urges. Like I said, it's like you're needing to breathe, and everywhere you go, you only have the opportunity to take short breaths. And this has put a veil in front of our minds and ears to be able to appreciate new developments of artful music and progress, which only a century ago had crowds screaming for more. I'm guilty of this too, though, just so you know. Only a year ago, you wouldn't find anything but classical music on my playlist. I was a complete and utter snob. So it was ironic, in a sense, that I was so interested in mind, because I was depriving myself of such good art and music that maybe wasn't 100% rooted in this classical genre. Now I'm a diehard Radiohead fan, as you get to see later. Part of my goal today is to get all of you to realize a similar thing, and that's that your perception of music can be changed, and a whole new world of music and consciousness can actually be revived. Music and the mind, consciousness especially, are two enormously complex and inspiring topics that have defined me and continue to be my two greatest passions. Their infinite scope and the fact that music is unlike any other art makes me that much more frustrated that society has turned music into a massively consumable object. It is something to be constantly explored and inspired by, and yet what I call the iPod phenomenon has only actually helped spread this basic comfort music. The media tells us more and more what they define as good for us to listen to. In doing so, we've actually lost part of that inherent connection to our own minds that we get out by seeking art music. In my book, art music is not what you'll see on Wikipedia, and for all you Wikipedia fans out there, this is one reason to be cautionary. Art music on Wikipedia is defined as a sort of austere and serious art. It's only an extension of this classical definition. In my book, that's not what it is. It's not interchangeable with genre. It's just a term I'll use through this talk to remind us all that while genre of music, while important on some levels, has created an unnecessary chasm between equally innovative types of music. So to try and bridge this chasm, I want to show why we've been desensitized to what's actually essential for more active brains and a deeper musical consciousness. The deepest, if you will, of musical breaths. And as exquisitely musical as all of us are, and yes, all of you are exquisitely musical people, the media has inoculated us against what our brains are actually wired to need. So we've got to bring back what I call this funky state of deep listening and wonder, all the while recognizing that labels like classical and popular or electronic or reggae, all of these things for the future of music may in fact be inapplicable. So how do we do that? This is a big question. We first need to show before this deeper musical consciousness can be reached, we've got to be satisfied with certain basic musical devices. And I'll show how we get fed comfort music everywhere we go, which usually stops after 3 levels of this hierarchy. I'll also look at some assumptions that we've developed and that have built up because of this, and then show a little bit about what makes artful music unique and different. I'll then examine how necessary performance is as an aspect of this musical consciousness. And last, tell you about some artists who optimistically are working with present demands to usher in this music to the present state. So, rhythm, the most basic of musical devices. My walking, just like this, is actually an example of an intimate connection between your motor cortex, which is one of the earliest and most primitive parts of the brain, and a sense of rhythm. And Professor Daniel Levitin, who is doing great work at McGill on music perception and cognition, reminds us that this connection actually exists, that neural networks are activated in your motor cortex when you perceive and execute rhythm. So with movement being one of our most essential features, rhythm follows right along. You can go ahead and clap to people on the streets when they move. It might be a little bit creepy, but it shows that you're rhythmical. But we pick up on rhythm too. Not only do we detect it immediately when it's there, on a basic level, we also make predictions. Where will it go? Will it get faster? Will it get slower? Will the beat pattern stay the same? And your prefrontal cortex, another very large and assiduously researched part of your brain, is responsible for much of this predictive activity. But wait, there's more. We also abstractly associate rhythmic pace and patterns with certain emotions and emotional content. Fast, as I'm sure you've all experienced, might convey and be translated by various parts of your brain to mean intensity, or slow may mean sad, or things like this. The point is that even the most basic musical device represents this elements of this musical consciousness. And there's actually an evolutionary reason that we're rhythmical, and thus a reason why it's built into our brains. Again, Dan Levitin tells us that rhythm actually united people in social groups, such as under the threat of tribal warfare, or in a modern-day example, a bunch of teenagers getting together and snapping to the beat of a song that they found important and uniting in defiance against authority. But again, this is only the beginning, only that small sip of a breath of what's built into our brains. Most of the music we hear actually goes 2 levels up. Okay, and the first of these levels is tonality, the tonal system and basic musical structure. And tonality is based on the precise frequency relationships of what's called the harmonic series, or in colloquial terms, the overtone series. And tonality itself means that there's always this father note that we want to return to. And return to this father note is determined by all the relationships in what's called a scale, a musical scale that's being used. Now, 3 centuries ago, I'm going to take you back 300 years, classical era composers capitalized on these relationships and gave birth to a vast, very vast set of harmonic possibilities in a tonal framework. And they also created rules for how long musical statements could be and in what context they could be developed. So that's the second level. The third level is timbre. And over the past century, I would argue, electronics has given us a wealth of resources to help it define a new popular sound, which is part of what we hear everywhere. And this is the development of timbre, or sound quality, which is an essential musical property. While many popular artists are very forward-looking in this respect, the popular timbre of today is so clean, refined, and precise that it has also trained our ears to expect a certain type of sound and to be happy with a certain type of sound. All the while, and this is something for you to think about, simple tonality has endured, and we are saturated with music of the same forms or variants of the same forms, the same relationships, the same musical structures, but get this, on a much, much more simple level than when people like Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven were composing. So most of what you hear conveys simple, uncomplicated emotions and has predictable tonal melody and harmony. And there's nothing wrong with this on a basic level. It make you feel good or groovy or sad or what have you. But it only allows for the release of certain neurotransmitters on the emotional side, such as dopamine, and engages the centers of your brain only on a certain level. And this is what I call the comfort zone. Social messages tell us that it's okay to stop here, that your musical breath can stop here and be just a bit deeper. But art music that's artfully composed with intention, plays with all kinds of these elements, gives them added dimension, depth, and gives you the opportunity to hear these rules being broken in imaginative ways. So we've got to cross this comfort line. Don't believe me, believe these guys, they're big. We need to be able to differentiate musical art from stuff that only flirts with our musical needs. Leonard Bernstein, one of the most prolific musicians and composers of the 20th century, says there's only good and there's bad music. 3 centuries before him, Georg Friedrich Handel, a musical giant of the Baroque era, says in response to a message from royalty that he had entertained crowds. He said, "Oh, I would be so sorry if I entertained them. My hope was to make them better." The fact that music can make us better people, that it can change us, is something that we need to get back to. Well, how do we do that? We need to run through a couple of assumptions first. As psychiatrist Anthony Storr points out in his book, Music and the Mind, we have this assumption that music is only here to please us. That's the message of comfort music. But if you think about this, that's not true. Our brains would have evolved to perceive music in less active ways, and this simply is not the case. Oh, hello. We're simply fed all this music all the time, so social messages prevent us and prevent our brain from working the way it's actually built to. Second, that classical music is for the few. It's just not true. Classical music can't be popular. Only 50 years back, only about 130 years or 140 years ago, this guy, Franz Liszt, biggest pop musician of the 19th century. You can note his fainting groupies off to the side. I'm sure we have our modern day equivalents of this. But the other cool thing about him is that he wasn't just the biggest pop musician of the 19th century. He was actually one of the most influential composers of the entire Romantic era. He was a great improviser, a great pianist, and yeah, he had this media image as well. But he also set a new tone for music. One more foray into our assumptions before you guys actually get to hear some music. Let me question these assumptions a little bit further. Right here I have pictured Radiohead screaming to an audience of maybe 10,000 people, and I've got an orchestra conductor. Now, on a very basic level, what is the difference between this guy on stage building intensity and tension and your hands up in the air with your brains thinking in metronomical precision? And what's the difference between that and the orchestra conductor communicating with a guy at the back of the orchestra or an audience member, waiting with metronomical precision to then, tension is released. He moves to a new section of music. On a basic level, there is no difference. Second assumption. Why do most of us have the patience to listen to a whole album of popular music that we like, that we have come to like, but we're not willing to pay $20 to go see a major symphony of the same length? And the answer is clear. Again, we've been saturated with these levels and comfort music and assumptions about the purpose of different genres. Now for some music. If you got to sit through an orchestral performance, you get to experience moments like I'm about to show you from one of the greatest symphonists of all time. Listen carefully to how Gustav Mahler comes and operates within what our ears have come to like, which is tonality, but also breaks the rules. He builds tension and earth-shattering emotion in ways that are characteristic of artful music, new harmonies, new textures, and in this case, a resurrection of the human spirit through deep symbolism and reference. After that. Okay. Well, there's one more element that's missing, and Mahler is just one example of an artful musician pouring himself into music. As I've put up here, performance, effective performance, to engage you and engage your minds to build a reputation about art music, is that missing element to reviving this musical consciousness of deep listening and wonder. As I've shown here, Radiohead, a great example of performers of now. They're extremely popular musicians who have built up this reputation while, at the same time, always staying true to art and innovation. Their music always explores new textures, new harmonies, ways of conveying symbolism and emotion on complex ways, and yet they're wildly popular. And not only that, classical musicians are lining up to transcribe their music. And that's where we get to this funky state of consciousness, where we're able to be satisfied on all these basic levels of music and also engage in performance with others and hear what others are listening to. And that's this at the top of the musical hierarchy. And there's great news for us, and that is that many organizations around the world are trying to revive this state by ushering artful music into the 21st century. Who's bringing back this state? Well, San Francisco Symphony, who played that stunning Mahler clip that I showed you, is one example. And they've converted, in addition to being a prestigious classical organization, they also have great initiatives to convert, such as Davies After Hours, which converts their concert hall into a nightclub with artists from various other genres. Classical Revolution, you'll have to excuse me, also from San Francisco. I'm from California. Another organization that tries to build a public consciousness for classical music and make it not just in serious context. Fulcrum Point, New Music Project, an organization in Chicago, which according to the Chicago Sun-Times throws the conservatory doors open, and according to the founder, Stephen Burns, reintegrates art music into relevant and exciting contexts. Aphex Twin, maybe a person that you've all heard of, emerges as a monumental figure in electronic and art music. Without any musical training whatsoever, he's managed to build a huge media image while also being a master of complex rhythm, effective melodies, and also draws influence from big classical names such as Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, John Cage, and Eric Satie. And lastly, to end this presentation, I'm going to play for you a clip from El Sistema, whose founder won the TED Prize Award, Jose Abreu. And they're an organization in Venezuela who has been taken from the streets, from the slums of Venezuela, and turned into classical music virtuosos. And this is our hope for an orchestral future and a future of exciting art music. Listen and feel free to dance as they do. So with that, as they do, let's begin to abandon labels, abandon genre. Wait, you can turn it off. Yeah, my whole finale is ruined. No. So let's do what they do, right? Do what we love. Go out, listen deeply. Go out and feed your minds, your hearts, what they're actually built to need. Thank you.